What you are about to hear is what happens when a secret is kept for so long that it becomes a ghost story. But this isn't a story about ghosts. It's about two little boys, a city that never forgot them, and a scientific miracle that forced a 75-year-old mystery to finally give up its dead. Part 1. The Secret in the Wood. He wasn't deep in the woods. He was in a brush area, just off a trail not far from a popular section of the park. As he was clearing away some bushes and overgrowth, he saw it. A pile of old, decaying leaves and dirt that looked out of place. Underneath it, he found what looked like a tattered piece of clothing. It was a woman's fur coat, rotted by years of rain and snow. He moved it aside, and his heart must have stopped, because underneath that coat, lying in a shallow, hidden grave, were two small skeletons. The scene was both horrifying and strangely peaceful. The two skeletons were lying on their backs, side by side, with their little feet pointing towards the water of Burrard Inlet. It was as if someone had laid them down to rest. But this was no peaceful rest. Lying right there with them was a small hatchet. The police were called immediately, and the happy sounds of the park were replaced by the grim silence of a crime scene. Detectives arrived, and what they found would haunt the Vancouver Police Department for the rest of the century. The skeletons were clearly children. Their bones were tiny. The coroner, who first examined them at the scene, could tell right away that their skulls had been fractured. They had been killed by violent, repeated blows from the hatchet found right beside them. The initial investigation was a flurry of activity. Who were these children? Based on the development of their bones and teeth, experts guessed they were boys, likely brothers, somewhere between 6 and 10 years old. How long had they been here? That was harder to tell. The bodies were completely skeletonized, meaning all the skin and tissue had decomposed away. This process takes time. Looking at the leaves and debris covering them, and the state of the few items found with them, the police guessed they had been lying there for at least 5 years, maybe since 1947 or 1948. They had been killed and hidden here while the world outside the park went on, completely unaware. The press got wind of the story, and the newspapers gave them a name that would stick for generations. The Babes in the Woods, a name from an old children's story, now attached to a real-life nightmare. The entire city of Vancouver was gripped by one question. Who would do this to two little boys? And where did they come from? Part 2. Chasing Ghosts. For the detectives in the 1950s, this was like trying to solve a crime in the dark. The most basic and important part of any murder investigation is knowing who the victim is. Point. Without a name, you have no past to investigate, no family, no friends, no school, no enemies. You have nothing. And in this case, the police had two victims with no identity. Their first and most logical step was to check every single missing child report. They started in Vancouver, then expanded to the entire province of British Columbia, then all of Canada. They found nothing. No family had reported two little boys of that age missing. This was deeply strange. How could two children just disappear from the face of the earth without a single person, a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, a teacher, raising the alarm? It suggested a very dark possibility that the person responsible for them was also the person responsible for their deaths. The detectives then turned their attention to the clues found at the scene. Dot. The hatchet. It was a common type of hatchet. Nothing special about it. They couldn't trace it to a specific store or owner. It was a dead end. The woman's fur coat. This was an interesting clue. In the 1940s, a fur coat was a luxury item. But this one was old and worn. Had it belonged to the killer? Perhaps a mother or another female relative? Or was it just something grabbed to cover the bodies? They showed it to fur experts, but again, it was impossible to trace. The children's belongings. A few pathetic items were found with the boys. A small leather aviator-style helmet, the kind a little boy would play with. A pair of children's shoes, worn through at the soles. An empty lunchbox, suggesting their final trip into the park might have started as a picnic. These items painted a sad picture of children who likely didn't have much. The police even examined the bones for more clues about their lives. Forensic science in the 1950s was nothing like it is today, but they could still learn things. An analysis of the boys' teeth showed they had a lot of cavities and no fillings. Another sign that they probably came from a family with little money for dental care. They also found evidence of an inherited, rare dental anomaly, which strongly suggested the boys were brothers. More tragically, their bones showed signs of what was likely rickets, a condition caused by a lack of nutrition, specifically vitamin D. The police department put out public appeals. The story was in all the papers, on the radio. They begged for anyone with information to come forward. Maybe someone remembered a family with 2 little boys who suddenly weren't around anymore. It was easier to fall through the cracks back then. No one came forward. Every lead went cold. The case file grew thicker with reports and interviews that led nowhere. Slowly, inevitably, the investigation wound down. The babes in the woods were buried in a cemetery in Burnaby, under a simple headstone that read, "Unknown." And for decades, that's what they remained. Part 3, the echo of a crime. Years turned into decades. The 1950s became the 60s, then the 70s. The original detectives on the case retired, and new ones took their place. But the file on the babes in the woods never fully closed. It was one of those cases that gets under a city's skin. Every few years, a newspaper would run an anniversary story, reminding people of the 2 little boys still lying nameless in their graves. It became a piece of Vancouver's dark folklore. For the police, the case was a source of institutional frustration. It was a constant reminder of a failure to get justice for 2 innocent children. Every new detective who inherited the file would read through it, hoping to see something their predecessors had. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is the unique genetic blueprint inside almost every cell of our bodies. By the 1990s, forensic scientists had figured out how to extract DNA from old evidence like bloodstains or hair. They realized that even bone, which can last for centuries, contains DNA. This was a revolution. Suddenly, old cold cases had a new chance at life. In 1996, this is a very delicate process. It involves carefully digging up the caskets and bringing the remains back to a lab. A team of forensic anthropologists and DNA specialists were brought in. Their job was to see what secrets the bones still held. The first thing they did was a modern forensic analysis. They confirmed the original findings: 2 boys, likely brothers, killed by severe trauma to the head. They were able to narrow down their ages more accurately. One was about 7 or 8 years old, the other a year or 2 younger. Then came the most important part. They took small samples of the bone and sent them to a specialized lab. The scientists began the long, difficult process of trying to extract a usable DNA profile. It's much harder to get DNA from old bone than from fresh evidence. The DNA degrades over time, breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces. But after many attempts, they succeeded. They had a DNA profile for each of the boys. It was a monumental step forward. They now had the boy's unique genetic signature. They compared the two profiles, and the results. The police now had a powerful tool they never had before. But a tool is only useful if you have something to compare it to. They ran the boy's DNA through the National DNA Databank of Canada, which contains profiles of convicted criminals and DNA from other crime scenes. There was no match. This wasn't surprising, but it was disappointing. The hope was that a living relative, perhaps arrested for some other crime, would be in the system. Part 4. The Family Tree Detective. Another 20 years went by. The world changed again. The internet became a part of everyday life, and with it came a new phenomenon: consumer DNA testing. Companies like Ancestry DNA and 23andMe made it possible for anyone to send in a saliva sample and get a report about their ethnic origins, and most importantly, a list of genetic relatives who had also taken the test. Millions and millions of people did this, building a massive global database of human. Police and forensic scientists realized this database could be used to solve cold cases. The new technique was called investigative genetic genealogy. It's a bit complicated, but the basic idea is simple. You take the unknown DNA from a crime scene, in this case from the bones of the two boys, and upload it to one of these public genealogy websites. The website then searches for any relatives, even very distant ones. It might find a second cousin. Once you have a match, even a distant one, the real work begins. Genealogists, who are experts at building family trees, start with that distant cousin and build their family tree upwards, looking for their great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and so on. Then, they take the unknown DNA profile and try to build its family tree downwards from those same common ancestors. By mapping out all the descendants, they can slowly narrow down who the unknown person could be. It's like detective work, but with birth certificates and census records instead of fingerprints. In 2018, the Vancouver police decided to give this cutting-edge technique a try. They partnered with Redgrave Research Forensic Services, a company in the United States that specialized in using genetic genealogy to solve cold cases. The scientists took the DNA profile that had been sitting in a database since the 90s and uploaded it to a public genealogy site called GetMatch. They got a hit. Not a close relative, but several distant cousins. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for 70 years. Now, the genealogists' hunt began. It was a massive, sprawling puzzle. They started building out the family trees of these distant cousins, going back into the 1800s to find the Then, they started tracing all the branches of that family forward in time, looking for a part of the family that had lived in or near Vancouver in the 1940s. They were looking for a family branch that had two little boys who were born in the early 1940s and then just vanished from the records. They weren't in the 1950s census. They didn't have school records after a certain point. They simply disappeared. The work took years. It was filled with police investigators made the call. Imagine getting that phone call. A detective asking you about aunts or uncles you never knew you had, who disappeared before you were even born. The woman was shocked, but she agreed to help. She provided a DNA sample. The lab went to work one last time, comparing her DNA to the DNA from the bones. And then came the moment. It was a perfect match. Part 5. Derek. The police released a faded black and white photograph of the two brothers. Derek, the older one, with a serious look on his face. David, the younger one, with a little smile. They were real. They had names. With their identities confirmed, the police could finally piece together the tragic story of their short lives. Derek was born in 1940, and David in 1941. They had an older sister. Their family life was unstable and marked by poverty. Their mother died when they were very young. Their father was unable to care for them. They were placed in the care of a close relative. The reason no one ever reported them missing became tragically clear. The relative they were living with likely told other family members and neighbors a simple, believable lie: that the children had been taken into custody by the Ministry of Child and Family Development. In the post-war era, it was not uncommon for the state to intervene and take children from impoverished homes. It was a plausible story, so no one questioned it. No one looked for them. It was the perfect cover for a perfect crime. The investigation now had a clear focus. Police believe, with a high degree of certainty, that the same relative who was supposed to be caring for them was the one who led them into Stanley Park that day. That person, who should have been their protector, was their killer. The motive will never be known for sure, but it's not hard to guess. The boys were likely seen as a financial and emotional burden. Their murder was a brutal, final solution to a family problem. But there would be no arrest. There would be no trial. The person police believe is responsible for the murders of Derek and David Dalton lived out their entire life and died of natural causes years before the boys were ever identified. Justice in the legal sense, is impossible. The secret died with the killer. Even so, the identification brought a profound sense of closure. For the police department, it was the closing of their oldest cold case. For the family that had just learned of their long-lost relatives, it was a moment of incredible sadness, but also of connection to a past they never knew. And for the city of Vancouver, it was the end of a ghost story. The headstone in the Burnaby Cemetery could finally be changed. Unknown was replaced with their names, Derek and David Dalton. They were no longer the babes in the woods. They were two little boys who were lost to history, and after 75 years, were finally found. Their story is a powerful testament to the persistence of detectives who refused to give up, and to the incredible power of science to speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Now that you've heard how science found these lost boys, click the video on your screen to learn about the boy in the box, another famous case where genetic genealogy gave a nameless child his identity back after more than 60 years.